Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast. I'm your host, Phil Wiseman, Vice President of Communications here at McCarthy. This year, McCarthy is celebrating its 150th anniversary, and we're proud to have you along for thought-leading events like this. For more webcasts, you can visit us at mccarthy.com. Before we get started today, I have a couple of housekeeping items. I always like to cover those first. First of all, we get these questions. Can I get a copy of the slides after the presentation? And is this session being recorded for later viewing? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. Within 24 hours of the webcast, we'll send you a link to both the deck and the recording. So be on the lookout for an email from us. Also, I want to mention that we'll have a Q&A right after the presentation finishes today. You can send us a question during the event, though, if you'd like. There are two different ways to submit a question. If you're in the full screen mode, you'll just hover over the green bar in the center of your screen. You'll see a little downward arrow on the far right-hand side. Click that, and the Q&A box will open up. Type in your question and click Send. If you're in the split screen mode, you'll see the Q&A tab on the top right. Click on that. Type in your question and click Send. And we'll get to as many of those questions as we possibly can today. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Unfortunately, due to a last-minute conflict, Dave McCool is not able to join us. However, we do have Chad Dorgan, who is Vice President of Quality and Sustainability at McCarthy. Chad is based in Newport Beach, California. He received his PhD in indoor air quality from the University of Wisconsin, where he also earned his Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering degree. He has 25 years of experience in the construction industry, including the last 9 with McCarthy, where he directs the company's quality, sustainability, and VDC programs. Chad was recently named a LEED Fellow, the most prestigious designation bestowed by the USGBC and the Green Building Certification Institute. Chad, it's all yours.
Thank you, Phil. Great to be here, and welcome everyone. Just want to cover a few more things in my background so you understand where I'm coming from on this presentation. I originally started in the Air Force, where I did base level design, mechanical design, so I have a lot of experience in the design side. But also with the Air Force, I did operations, so operating facilities, understanding how to make them work after construction. And following that, I spent a little over a decade being a commissioning authority on getting processes and buildings to work throughout the design and construction process. And when I transitioned over to McCarthy, it was taking all that experience and how to make McCarthy the best builder from quality, sustainability, and VDC perspectives. So in this session, we're covering the process of BIM, and it is a little bit of play on words. It's not the BIM processes. We're focusing on what are the processes that we need to understand first, and then how do we integrate BIM into those processes. And it says in owner's overview, we'll be covering multiple perspectives: the owners, the trade partners, design partners, and general contractors throughout this. But ultimately, the processes that we're going to be covering result in a much more effective process, and in the end, an experience that we hope everyone enjoys and is improved results, not just on dollars and everything else, but you actually are happy to be within these processes. There are 3 learning objectives that we'll be going through and covering throughout this session. And the first is, how do you even understand what your BIM processes are? How do you prioritize them, but more importantly, streamline them? And there's going to be 2 approaches that we continually look at. Do you start with a process, or do you start with the technology? And both have been used in the past, and hopefully through this session you'll see why starting with the process is more effective. We'll be going through some specific examples of the processes of BIM, and one will be coordination. And as we go through that, I'll be covering some 3 three driving forces. And it's really important to understand these driving forces because it's not about the technology, it's these forces that get you success. And finally, at the end of the session, I'll be covering, how do you maximize the investments of technology by focusing on the process. And it's not about just buying the technology, it's how do you integrate it into your processes. The first question is, what is a process of BIM? And you look on this slide, there's two different ways that you can look at it. You can say, well, there's activities, there's a flow of activities, people, and technology. And the first way to look at it is you start with technology. You pick a software, you pick a platform, and say, well, here is my platform. Now let me design a process around it. And by doing that, you're basically having people respond to the technology and then develop your flow and activities around the technology. Now, it's not wrong, but when that happens, you're basically adapting a process around this developer's idea of what your process should be. And it doesn't always fit. It doesn't always flow well with what you want to do. The other perspective is process first. And here, you're using fundamentally what is your process. And what you'll see throughout this session is we've had these processes for decades, if not a millennium. So we're not really fundamentally changing the process. We're using that process and the history and best practices along with technology to get a better result. So for me, this process-first perspective, really understanding what we're doing, but even more importantly, why are we doing it? Why do you have that process in the first place? If you don't understand why, you're never going to improve. You're never going to be able to apply technology more effectively. So throughout this session, we're going to be covering what is this fundamental why? Because once you understand the why, it does drive the process. It does drive your people around the process, and ultimately it drives how do you integrate that technology into the process. And for me, it's effectiveness. It's not about necessarily making the process, easier to do. It's, is it effective? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? Is that process resulting in what we all expected it to do? If it's not, somewhere along the way, the process has been broken that we need to address, not just adding technology to a broken process. So when you look at process first, there is value that comes out of it. As I said, we start with this fundamental why. Why are we doing this process? And, a lot of times we just assume we know why, but I would challenge you to say, let's take a step back and really ask ourselves, why do we do coordination? Why do we do logistics? And if you don't have an answer, then you're probably not doing it effectively. But once you understand that why, that drives the use and continuity of best practices, because the best practices are coming out of the why. I'm doing it because I need to do it. It has critical value to my business processes. But also when you look at a best practice, it's usually only best once. So that continuity of best practices leads to this continuous improvement culture. It's not just saying I'm going to do it exactly the same as the last 5 times. It's saying, let me learn from best practices, and how can I do it better? And you only get that from a process perspective, that you have a solid approach. And when you say process, it's a viewpoint. It's a foundation. It doesn't mean it's a procedural step A, B, and C. It's how do you approach your segments within a project. And by having that process perspective, the why, the best practice, continuing culture, that all leads to the ability of that team in your organization to adapt very quickly to software changes. And for those that have moved to the cloud and a lot of their software, you're getting changes every single month, if not quicker. And if you are technology-centric, you are continually trying to adapt those technology and use it. But if you don't know why, it's kind of disconnected. So you're always kind of chasing this goal out in front of you because technology keeps changing. But if you have your why, your process, and you know why you're doing it, and it's solid, then you don't take all of the software changes. You take those that are relevant, because not everything in the software is going to be relevant and important to what you do. So that's really the value of process first. You got this foundation that you're making decisions on, and you know when and when not to use technology. This value also leads to value of people. And this is becoming more critical as we as an industry are going more towards design build, design assist, integrated project delivery. That's no longer, let's design it and then build it. It's a project perspective. Let's design build. Let's figure out how we're doing it together. And that value of process leads to designers and trade partners and clients and general contractors coming together saying, our goal isn't to have this back and forth and this over the wall. It's we want to design it once. We want to coordinate it once. And that's the value. We're not doing 3 design iterations. We're not doing coordination, find a mistake, and recoordinating, making all these changes. We come together as a team around these core processes. And then we layer on technology so that people can work with the process in this very collaborative effort. So that's really the foundation of what it is. But how do you go from that concept to reality? And that's really, how do you prioritize and streamline your existing BIM processes? And you can really just take BIM off of that. How do you prioritize and streamline your processes? And BIM is kind of that addition of technology to your existing processes. And step 1 is to identify what are your processes. We all have them. We've always had them. And it's different from different entities. You know, we've always had to do facility management. But how do we do it now in this new age? Let me just step through a quick example here to help you understand. One that is just on the cusp of changing the way we do business, and I call that material delivery. We've got a lot of drones coming out. We got 3D printing where we're almost there where we can print, you know, bolts and screws. Instead of having to order them and deliver them, we print them on site. So the process of material delivery is getting the stuff we need from point A to where we're going to install it. So that fundamental process isn't changing. We've got to do that. How we do it, how we align that with our existing processes with this new technology is understanding why are we doing material delivery. And it's not just getting a point A to point B, it's getting the material there when you need it. So you're not moving material 3 or 4 times. It's getting the right material to the right person at the right time. That's our existing process. That's what we strive for. But now how do we procure this new technology? How do we embed that into our models and into our planning, into our scheduling with drones, with 3D printing, and then implement it to be more effectively? But if you don't know what your process is, you don't know why you're doing it, that procurement and implementation won't work. So the recommendation is you do identify your 5 or 10 core processes. You then understand what the existing is, alignment there, and then you start having a discussion of how this technology will improve it. And what is the processes of BIM? You know, I could have put 20 or 30 items up here. I just put 9 up. And, you know, facility management is a process. It's changing, but, you know, for decades, for millennium, we've had to maintain facilities. We've had to have documentation. We've had people to keep facilities operating. It's getting more complex, but the basics of facility management hasn't changed. You still need to know what the part is. You still need to know what the frequency of maintenance is. You need to know how to replace it or repair it on an ongoing basis. That's information. You know, as-built conditions, we've always had to document how the building's been done. It's from marking paper up to photos to videos to now laser scanning. So, but the fundamentals of why we're doing it hasn't changed. It's so we know what we built. So in the future, when we need a change, we don't have to go back and reinvent and refigure out what was built. And visualization, we've always done sketches and images and different ways to visualize how we're going to do both design and construction. That hasn't changed. Why we're doing it hasn't changed, so we understand how it's going to be built. We can convey to non-technical people the look of it. Technology is just making it easier for people to understand. So there's 4 here highlighted in orange, and I'm going to step through these 4 in a little bit more detail, and starting with coordination and going to modularization, document management, logistics, and really take a little bit deeper dive into those processes of BIM. And if you go back to the original foundation, going through why are we doing this? And then what is the process and activities we do, followed by how the people overlay it. And that's really critical to understand all those 3 before we talk about technology. Again, process first, leading towards technology. Let's look at coordination. Start with why. You look at this, there's 2 fundamental ways that you can look at why are we doing coordination. And the first is, pretty obvious. We want to identify and resolve physical conflicts. Sounds good. You don't want to have to build something that's not going to fit. But when you look at that fundamental why, what does that lead to from a process perspective? Well, it leads to you're focused on finding and fixing clashes, on making things fit together. And generally, you're going to follow the sequence of construction when you do that process approach. So I'm going to start from the ground floor, work left, go up to the next floor, next floor, next floor. So it's very finite and very methodical in how you do it. And often, you're giving priority to the largest or sometimes largest trade, depending on who's in the room. And it's not wrong, it's just that you're really focused on, can I make the stuff fit? And, it's good, but from my perspective, we're missing a really key element. And that's what the second fundamental why here is what if I just said I want to collaboratively establish project details? And, think back 20 years, 30 years before we had all these computers and BIM models. We had the designer, the master architect, the builder, the trade sitting around a table figuring out how am I going to make this work? And it wasn't, us against them. It was we need to figure out how to build this. It was collaboratively figuring out the project details. So to me, that's the fundamental why of coordination. It's not to find mistakes. It's to figure out as a team, how do we build it? And this leads to, we want to design to avoid clashes. We want to coordinate to avoid clashes. We want party A to talk to party B as they're going through the process. So in the end, we're not using software to find clashes. We're using software to communicate and to coordinate and end up with a better result. Also with this fundamental why, it changes how you coordinate. You're no longer just saying, I'm going to follow the sequence of construction. There are decisions that have to be made very early that don't affect early construction. They affect very late construction. Key milestones, topping out a classic one, but, permanent drying of the building is critical for all the subsequent activities of production drywall and finishes. Getting temporary air is critical for getting the flooring system, the concrete to dry out. So it's not about the sequence of construction, it's about those key decisions and how do we coordinate to get those key decisions agreed to earlier. It's giving those critical issues priority earlier in the process. So I hope you see in this that understanding that fundamental why. Why do we do coordination? It's not about just making things fit. It's how do we establish that collaborative nature of how we're going to make it work. It's maybe a nuance to some, but to me that's pretty fundamental on changing the entire process and the way you approach it. And this does lead to what are your activities and flow? And there are three driving elements of coordination that allow us to achieve that fundamental why. And the first one is establish origin. And to me, it's more than that. It's agreeing upon what is your common discussion point. How do you make sure you're aligned on your reference? And this could be a physical point, but it could also be understanding that level of detail of what are you providing versus someone else, a common reference point. But it also leads to that the individual is responsible. Once they understand that common reference and what is expected of me, it's my responsibility to make sure I'm not causing the problem. If I find a problem, it's not, hey, plumber, you screwed up, you put a pipe through my beam. It's me talking between the structural engineer or structural sub and engineer and the plumbing and saying, how do we fix this? In that clash avoidance, it's not, I'm trying to make it fit, I'm trying to make it work and in a collaborative nature. And the one thing we found when we do this, it takes that cycle time from, well, if it's a clash, I now need to put 4 or 5 people around it to fix it, to where if I'm trying to avoid it, it's 2 people talking. So the cycle time goes from like a 3x down to a 1x. And that's just the value of changing your perspective of how you're going to approach this. So the first driving factor is that common reference. The second is that individual responsible. And the third one is shown in the stage development. It's really the gross, finite, or fit and flow. And what I mean by that is you don't need to get to minutia to understand how things are going to work. And you usually start with that gross coordination. How are things going to flow through the project? What are those big items we need to figure out? The shafts first, vertical, then horizontal. Foundations, excavation first, undergrounds first, and then really driving to that finite. And by doing this, you've got the team, not an individual driving it, but the team saying, here's what's important, here are the priorities. As you go from that gross to finite, you've already established that collaborative atmosphere and the interface between the various people. And that leads to people. Coordination isn't about a model, isn't about technology. It's about people coming together, understanding different perspectives, and coming up with a better solution. So coordination is about understanding client needs very clearly, and then getting the design partners, general contractor, trade partners, suppliers to work around those common goals. And ultimately, we need the building built, but we need a building that meets the client needs, is operational, is reliable, durable for not 1 year, but 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So it's trying to break the mold of coordination as getting things to fit to getting things to work. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of these lines are being blurred between design partners, trade partners, contractors. It's not about who is doing the work, but how do we agree upon what the work is, and how do we get to the right answer? So we've covered the why, the process, and the people. It doesn't matter if you're doing that on paper or technology or wherever the future technology is. That foundation doesn't change. We're trying to find a better way to do it and get that collaboration. Now, what technology does is it makes it better, makes it easier, enables us to do this. And the foundation of this is the collaborative platform. And there are dozens out there that you could use, but ultimately, how do you get everyone on the same page? How do you get a platform that allows us to identify issue, resolve an issue, track it, without a bunch of passes over the wall? What you want is for people to go to a location to resolve the conflict, not to have 5 different people trying to resolve it independently. Once you have that collaborative platform, that leads to the model creation. This could be 5 to 20 different unique models that are being created by designers or trade partners. But, that's going to be done in what is relevant to those individuals. What's more important for the team is how do you federate those models? And it's not just bringing the models together, but going back to that clash avoidance, how does everyone access that very model to see the issues, to resolve the issues? As they make a change, it updates automatically. That real-time kind of clash detection, clash avoidance. And if I can see what everyone else is working on, I have a better chance of designing within those constraints versus causing more issues. But it doesn't stop there. It has to go and get to the field. And as it's being constructed, you have access to the same information. And as there is an issue, you collaboratively resolve it with the platform. So it's really important to have this platform figured out where all this flows together, but we all go back to the single source of resolving issues. Now let's look at logistics. Again, what's the why? Why do we do logistics? And, you know, a lot of people are looking at manpower material flow. Just how do we get people and material on there? But ultimately, that really leads to a mentality and approach of linear schedules and I tell you how to do it, you know, top-down management approach. And that doesn't work too well. You know, I can tell people all day long how to work, but they're still going to do it the way they want to. If we look at the other fundamental why, continuous improved focus of the flow of work, again, get kind of back to collaboration is how do I do logistics not to just get manpower material on the project, but to continuously improve how that manpower material flow through the project. And also driving that down to the individual. They're accountable for doing their work in connection of others around them. Now, that goes from linear schedules over to this concept of collaborative scheduling. We work together to figure out how to do it, not I tell you how to do it. So I didn't want to put just a bunch of bar charts up here. It didn't really make sense, but here's some examples of how that flows out of the fundamental why. And the top left is showing a site plan, but it's just not a site plan. It's how are you interacting not just with construction, but with the owner and the community. You know, I've got 5,000 dump trucks coming up with dirt going through downtown urban environment. Well, how do I do that? How do I not impact the community along with construction? So logistics isn't about just what I'm doing, it's how I impact others and using that fundamental why, collaborating with the community, with the code officials, with the owner to come up with a better plan. The top right, it's that whole logistics of going from this concept design to reality. How do we flow all those different activities through to get that reality to be successful? But it also includes all the stuff that's not shown in the model or in the design. It's the form work, the man lifts, the cranes, material deliveries. How does that all work together the most effectively? And it includes a lot of non-technology stuff, that collaborative scheduling, getting people out of their seats, get them standing up and working together of what's the schedule that's going to work best for us. You know, call it pull planning, call it collaborative scheduling. It's about people coming together to come up with a better answer, not me telling them how to do it. And this leads to people, and here we got kind of two groups of people because projects are not simple. We've got the project level where the client, the design partners, trade partners, general contractor come together and say, you know what are those core milestones for logistics? It's not getting down to a level of a baseline or here are all the details. It's what's going to make this project successful? How are we going to continuously improve and flow the work? And then you have a separate group that really takes those milestones and says, well, here's how we're going to do it. Be it a mid-level or a baseline, but down to that weekly work plan where they're in front of a board and saying, here's how we're going to do it. And there we're getting down to the trade, the crafts, the superintendents, and the suppliers even. How's this equipment and materials going to flow through here? But it's not about a number on a piece of paper. It's about them collaborating as a team for us to get there. Again, back to that fundamental why. And this then leads to technology, you know, and you do have to document how that logistics is going, the as-built conditions using laser scanning and other things. But you've also got, you know, tying those schedules to the model to visualization. So more than just someone who understands a Gantt chart can read and understand how the flow of work's going to go. But more importantly, it's taking all this information we have and packaging so the craft can do their job. Work plans, very detailed, but how's that form work going to go? How are we going to do this week? And it's getting to that minutia, the data and the information on what they need to do their job right the first time. So logistics is more about just material manpower. It's information, the flow of information throughout the project. Our third process of BIM is document management. And a lot of people think, well, document management, that's not BIM. But let's look at the fundamental why again. If you're thinking document management is all about record retention and filing and putting documents in different, file locations and folders, and the subcontractor has their set of drawings. I have my set. The owner has their set of drawings. That's not really a good approach to document management because you have different perspectives and different views, different formats, and you're all kind of talking different languages almost. If the fundamental why is really about how do I get that single source of truth? How do I get the right information, the right person, the right time? But we as a team are always utilizing the same information. And what this does is shifts from maintaining information to providing information at that point of need. And the point of need is different. In design, that point of need is making decisions on design. In construction, it's getting the information so the craft can build it right the first time. During operations, it's the operators or users can use the facility or operate the facility the best they can. And ultimately, this is where technology comes in, where it's access from anywhere. You don't need to go to the information comes to you. But it's all about that fundamental why of how do you want to approach document management. This leads to the flow of activities. And what's interesting here is it starts way, 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 way back in that concept phase. I want a project. Okay, well, I got to develop a proposal. There's documents there. Well, how do you access those documents as a team versus as individuals? Going into construction management and design, again, it's not having documents over in the designer and the owner and the contractor's, areas. It's how do we all come together around those documents? All the way to field activities where it's, I don't need to go walk to the trailer. I have access to the information at the point of need that also then flows into operation and maintenance. So that they have the information that they need in order to do their job right the first time. And this is where it gets a little bit more granular on the people. Because when you look at a client, the client isn't a person. Yes, they're the decision makers. We have all the occupants of the building. They need to have information to occupy the building, how to use the facility. Especially as we go to these, highly sustainable and green facilities, you open the window, it fundamentally changes the way that room operates or how the lights operate or how you even just do lunch. It all affects the user because of the decision that was made during how this facility is supposed to operate. But also flows to community. How do you access information from the community on this project? And one thing to think about here is all this information, when you look at a single source, it's all the same information, but we're accessing it differently. What the designer's looking at is different than what the community would look at, which is different than the trade partners. But if we have a single source of truth, we're accessing the same core information. I'm just visualizing it differently. And technology is making that easier, but it's always been the intent, I think, in all projects throughout history. And this is really where technology has made a big difference on having us achieve that single source of truth through the cloud, through communication. So the upper left is, a plan room. There's a few pieces of paper there, but ultimately you're accessing everything electronically. But you're accessing it from a remote location or right there, but all these other entities, the field, the tablets, they're accessing that same information. And that's what's critical. We're not having compartments of information. We have a holistic approach to it. And what I really like in the bottom left here is this field kiosk. It's not that it's electronic. If you take a close look at it, there's no paper there. Where the paper was, they put a whiteboard. Well, why'd they do that? It's about the collaboration. It's about two superintendents and crafts coming around looking at drawing. Well, it's not the drawing that they need to do a sketch. Well, and guess what? They can take a photo of the sketch and physically attach it to that drawing, and they haven't lost it. Anyone goes back to the drawing, they can access that sketch and know what the intent was. Or a designer can come here and do the same thing with the trade partners. So once you understand that fundamental why of trying to build better, it changes how you create your tools. Even up to the upper right, it's a elevation view of a building enclosure showing all the different building enclosures. Well, you click one of those numbers, it gives you all the details on how to build it. Again, trying to communicate and get information of those who need it in a much more interactive process. Down the bottom right, where tablets from the field with the model, with QR codes. Again, how do you access it quicker, but you're always going back to that core single source of truth? And our final process of BIM is modularization. And a lot of people will think, well, modularization is new to buildings, and yeah, it has, but I would venture to say no, not to industry as a whole. Shipbuilding's been doing modularization for decades, and there's just two, again, fundamental ways to look at it. Are we trying to identify modularization as part of construction? We get a design, we figure out how to modularize it. Well, if you do, that's really the general contractor and trade partners figuring out opportunities during mobilization, how we're going to execute the work differently. But it does limit your opportunities and the value proposition because it's really focused on trade efficiencies, not necessarily project effectiveness. Back to that fundamental why. What if we just switch the fundamental why that we're designing for modularization? I'm not saying that we're going to do these C crates and put them together in a tinker toy, but you're approaching design from a module perspective. So during that schematic design phase, or even conceptual design, you're sitting down saying, how do I design modularly versus, trying to do this production line? And what we're finding is that's really driving the design process because you're identifying commonalities that you don't need to redesign 50 times. You design it once, kind of design 1X, and then reuse it. And you're focusing on not on just design process, but the effectiveness of the overall project, on how do we come together as a team, not just to design better, but that will flow directly into how the building's going to be built. And this does change the way that we approach design. We do need to start thinking in modules, that what are the compartments of how we're going to design this building, align with trade partners during that design phase so we got both the what and the how, so when we flow into construction, it leads right to that fabrication model, that level of detail where all the subs can come together and just build it. Now, it could be a production line offsite where you're building these modules, but it also changes the mentality of doing production lines in place. And when you start thinking about that, it's one trade at a time going through very systematically and doing an inline production. But also it leads to a whole lot of discussion around how do you do logistics around this and change the whole mindset of construction from piecemeal to modules to a much more effective flow. And again, this is where let me hit people first. This is where it's really interrelated. The gears just have got to come together between the designers, trade partners, GCs, and even the client and suppliers. And that we're fundamentally going to change the way we look at design construct. And it's no longer let's design it, hand it off, and then they go figure out how to build it. It's really bringing that master builder back into design and saying, how do we do it better for everyone, not just for one person? So here's a couple examples of what I mean by this. And the top left and kind of bottom middle here, it's a module. It's saying I've got a repetitive module, and these are examples of patient rooms in a hospital. I'm going to have 200 patient rooms. But instead of saying, let's lay out the patient rooms, then we'll design the patient rooms, and wherever the columns come through, we'll adjust, and we'll have, instead of one module, we'll get 13 or 14 different modules. Well, that's not effective in the way you execute the work, both in design or in construction, because every one of those different 13 has effort around it. So what if you change and said, okay, no, we're going to do a module. We're going to agree, here is the module for the 2 patient rooms and 2 bathrooms. And we're going to go to the nth degree, and when you look at it, you got little circles on top of these pictures. Those are point loads of where it goes as embeds into the structure. Well, I know the weight. I know where it's at. That leads to a better structural design because I have all the information. So you're basically doing a very detailed design around a small module, agreeing upon it, but then that accelerates the rest of the design because you've made the decisions. It also affects how you do your structure. It also affects how you do a lot of other things because you've done this really great detail early on. But also leads to fabrication, like top right, where you figured out how to design and build it before you build it, and then it just leads right into production. Again, either in a production line or in a in-place situation. So in summary, I hope you understand why it's important to start with why and really understand what is your foundation of your process. And by understanding that, that leads to a better process and ultimately a better decision around how those activities flow with people. And just remember, we didn't create coordination because we got models. We've been doing coordination back since the pyramids. So this is nothing new. It's just how do we improve it continuously? And then you end with technology. And the reason you want to do that is, I can put a 1x investment in technology, and I'll get a 1x back. But I can put a 1x investment in process and people, and I get a 5 or 10x in improvement back because I'm doing better with my process, and technology is just an enabler of that.
Great. Chad, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much for covering that with us today. I really like this explanation of process first and why it is so important that we consider that. I am going to open it up for Q&A, and I just wanted to remind everybody how to submit a question. So first of all, if you're in the full screen mode, you're going to hover over the green bar in the center, and then you'll see the little downward arrow in the top right of your screen. Just click that arrow, and the Q&A tab will open up. Type in your question, and click Send. If you're in the split screen mode, you'll see the Q&A over in the far right-hand column. You can just click on that Q&A tab, type in your question, and click Send. So I know you guys have a lot of questions out there. Here's a couple. I'm going to jump right into it. First of all, let's go to this one. As part of coordination, you stated that a collaborative platform is essential. Can you expand on what you use and how to engage designers?
Great question, Phil. Thank you. I would say that, when you start with process and you start looking at collaborative platforms, there isn't a single answer, which is good and bad, but ultimately you have to look at how do you get information in one location at one time. Now, there's the cloud technologies of file management like Box and others that you can use. There's collaborative platforms around PDFs that we've used on Bluebeam to create projects. And we also used more of the robust ones like ProjectWise and Buzzsaw to get more of the design in there. Ultimately, what we do is we sit down with the client and the designers and our trade partners and have a discussion saying, how are we going to collaborate? How do we get information in one location that we're all comfortable to and then adopt it? And what we do on a small school is going to be different than a $500 million hospital. We'll obviously use more robust technology as the project improves. But you have to have that discussion first and then choose the technology aligns with your project.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Here's a question that's come in. Will this idea of modularization lead to a central production facility, or can it be established in the field?
I think it's more of the module design. Greatest value is during design to make design easier that will flow into construction. Whether it will result in off-site construction or not, that'll be a decision based on the location you're at and the ability to do it. I find it'll likely, though, lead to a change in the way that we do construction, because once you have those modules, you can basically flow the trades through that floor a whole lot easier because they don't have to rethink how they did the first module. So you mock up the first module really good, and as you get to the second and third, you're looking for ways to continuously improve. But you can continuously improve because you're not changing how they do their work. Where if you had 13 different modules, it would be really hard to get that rhythm going in construction, either off-site or on-site.
Okay, very good. Here's a question, very specific. It says, in the future, how do you see the elevator, escalator industry being involved in BIM?
I think it's like any other trade. They need to be involved as early as possible in order to align their requirements with the project requirements. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're going to have going forward, especially as we get into more of the integrated design and this collaboration, is who do you bring in, how do you bring them in? And what we found is the more people involved, the better the result is. And how do you balance that with price and ultimate cost? And from my perspective, subcontractors all have their preferred vendors, especially elevators are, almost an entity on themselves. You just got to make a decision early, negotiate early, and then use that throughout the process to get the best possible. And ultimately, if we can design it once, coordinate it once, install it once, that's the best possible answer for everyone on the project.
Yeah, that would be ideal. Here's another question. Can you share any thoughts or insights into encouraging participation in trade or design subs that are not as technologically adept in order to get the most value out of your BIM implementation?
That's a great question. What we found is, it varies across the country, as everyone knows, and there isn't an answer for this. But what we've done effectively is, again, we start with process. All those trades, even if they're using technology or not, are doing logistics, are doing coordination, are doing scheduling. So let's have a discussion on what their process is and what's working, what's not. I mean, they can't be happy with all their processes. So you use their hot buttons to get them to go towards technology, but not change the fundamental reason why they're doing it. I think a lot of subs have balked in the past because they've been forced to do a process that doesn't fit the way they do business, and they don't understand why they're doing it. So it does cost more in that case, but they understand why. You align with it, you work with them, bring in external resources to get them over that technology learning curve. They almost in all cases have gone saying, yeah, this is a better way, but they don't go there if they don't understand why they're doing it.
Okay, all right. Okay, here's one that's an interesting one. It says, we've been attempting to market this approach for 9 years. How do you market this to owners and convince them this is the most successful method for construction?
I'll say first off, I'm not a marketer. What we do is really sit down with owners and, again, what are they trying to understand? What are their last 5 projects? What didn't work? And get them to understand that things aren't working because of technology. They're not working because the processes aren't working. And help them improve their own internal processes. And, one thing I'm not sure if I said, technology in BIM won't fix a broken process. If you're doing bad coordination now, adopting models in BIM will still be bad coordination because your process is fundamentally flawed.
Sure.
So working with the owner and the design team saying, okay, what's working, what's not, what bugs you? Let's fix that. And technology is a way to get there. It isn't the answer if the process is broken.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's move on. Do you think that the project and available resources would be better served by a complete design assist collaborative effort between the designers and the trade specialists prior to the bid quantification process?
Short answer, yes. And it goes back to collaboration, and it's not about bringing trades on just for bringing them on. It's because they have a very unique perspective. They have to live with the answer. And if they're part of the solution, they will live with it a whole lot better with less questions on the back end, less changes, ability to work more with the team. Now, you do need to have checks and balances as you bring them on. We do a part A and part B. Sure. Part A is for that design phase, and part B is for that hard bid at the end. And if we can't get to a number, we have to make a decision. But they're part of that discussion along the way. So we're not surprised, you got to reduce your number. They're part of the solution to get to the number that will work for everyone.
Okay. All right, good. Another question. Do you see the delivery methods adopting this approach, or adapting, I should say, to this approach?
From my perspective, well, one, I wouldn't be here saying this if I didn't, but two, when you look at all the challenges coming up, lack of craft labor, the complexity of projects increasing. One thing we didn't even talk about, the number of new materials coming out that we have no idea how we're going to apply it. All that isn't going to happen and work without a new approach. And, our industry has, traditionally not been the most effective or efficient. And it's not about getting a contractor on IPD. It's not about creating a BIM model. It's about going back to fundamentals and, getting those working like they used to.
Sure.
I remember a story, back in the day where they built the Capitol in Wisconsin off 18 sheets of paper. And when they remodeled it, they had about 5,000.
Wow.
So it's hard to even imagine how to do construction now with the technology we have. We got to do it better.
Sounds good. All right, before we get to the other questions, I do want to remind everybody to watch your inbox for directions on where to go for downloading today's presentation and recording. And you can also contact our speaker, Chad Dorgan, if you'd like to do further follow-up. It's cdorgan@mccarthy.com. So let's get moving and back into the questions. First, here's another one that says, with the pace of technology changing so fast, how do you deal with that, especially on long projects?
That is a challenge, Phil. And, you look at some of these big projects, you got 2 or 3 years design and 2 or 3 years construction. And, try and think 6 years ago where technology was. And, I don't think we had iPads back then. So the pace is very quick. And what we're doing at a very foundational level is, understanding the owner's process a whole lot better. Like, how do they really want to do maintenance? How do they really want to maintain and document and have at the end of the project? And somewhat make it technology agnostic. What data do you need? How do you want that data to be managed and controlled? And then make sure we capture the data all the way through. So in the end, regardless what technology is out there, we've got the core. We got the information that can be used with any platform. So you almost go in a little bit blind saying, hey, I don't know what's going to be, but I know it's going to be different. So let me create this foundational process for that flexibility in the future.
Okay. We've got just a couple more minutes left. Here's another one. It was interesting to see a blend of technology and old-fashioned paper in your logistics example. Do you see paper going away in the future?
I think it's going to be a while before paper goes away, just because of the size and what you need in the field. I'm a proponent of technology and 3D models and ability to pull them apart. but the functionality just hasn't gotten there to where the craft can use it. I think the craft is probably better with technology than most people think, but how do we convey it? How do we get that flow of information to them better? And I think paper is still going to be here. Ultimately, when we get to the Star Trek time where you can unroll a piece of paper and it's a digital paper, hey, that'll be perfect, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay, here's another one. The use of the module approach for designing would seem to restrict the creativity of the designers and make the end result fairly sterile. Is this the case?
And, I've heard that a few times as we've been presenting this and discussing with designers. And to me, it's a paradigm shift we need to go through. You look at any hospital or school building or office building where it's repetitive, or a hotel. Just because we have modules during the design doesn't mean it doesn't restrict creativity. And the example I give is like a hallway. You immediately think modules, okay, the hallway is going to be 10 feet wide all the way down. Well, if I do a module approach and I'm more effective, more efficient in the design and construction, let's make that a 14-foot hallway. And the modules are the same, but then we put, fake stuff in the front like Disney does on their walls or Universal Studios. You can change the aesthetics and look to still have modules in the core background. And I think it actually will make it easier and more creativity for designers because they're not focused on doing 13 modules. They do one module really good, and then the rest of the time is working on the flow and the aesthetics and what it's going to look like. I think it hopefully will free up their time to be more creative.
That would be great. Okay, guys, we are at the top of the hour. Janet, first of all, I want to thank you for preparing today's webcast. Super job, and we really appreciate it. I also want to thank everyone who attended today's webcast. It's been a pleasure having you along, and we hope to see you on another learning opportunity soon. Remember, if we didn't get to your questions today, we'll endeavor to get back to you as soon as we can. And lastly, be on the lookout in your inbox for that link to the deck and the recording. Again, I wanted to say thanks for attending, and we hope to see you at another McCarthy event very soon.